Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this video I'm going to review Mainstream Sellout by Machine Gun Kelly. This is a continuation of the pop-punk phase of Machine Gun Kelly after the release of his debut in this new era, Tickets to My Downfall. Now, I personally never really liked Machine Gun Kelly's music. From the rap stuff that I've heard out of him, it was pretty underwhelming. I didn't really care for. And when it comes to Tickets to My Downfall, I was basically pretty fine with him changing genres and trying something different. And while I don't really like the album, I think it's still a pretty bad album, I appreciate some of the changes in the sound, even if for the most part we're talking about a pretty basic and generic pop-punk album, but I still managed to somewhat prefer it in comparison to some of the rap stuff that he would do in the past. But still, it feels kinda weird to see an album like this gaining such popularity, because the thing is, at this point pop-punk has been kind of irrelevant, and seeing such a generic, basic and forgettable album in the genre managing to become so popular, it really shows that at this point the fanbase of this genre is basically desperate for anything that basically comes out. Now obviously there's the benefit that Machine Gun Kelly had a pretty huge career as a rap artist, but still Tickets to My Downfall doesn't really indicate the return of pop punk and that it's rising back to fame, because at the end of the day we get such lazy attempts as this one, which I'd say it's kinda forgiving, at least with Tickets to My Downfall, as it was like the first attempt on like a new direction for the sound of Machine Gun Kelly. But the thing is that with Mainstream Sellout, it basically contains all of the worst elements that could have been put in a pop-punk album. It's just here. All of the elements that would make especially the more mainstream approach of pop-punk so unappealing and to die out, all of them exist in this album. It is absolutely lazy, it is effortless, and the only reason this album exists over here is just to grab your attention. This is more of like a message to fuck all the haters and that he can do whatever the fuck he wants and that he's here to stay, which I can definitely get behind the statement. The issue is that there's not really something sarcastic or ironic over here, or something remotely fun, or something that you could at least say it's tongue-in-cheek. His attempt on trying to grab your attention is one that comes from a place of vulnerability of Machine Gun Kelly, as it doesn't really seem he manages to handle criticism all that greatly, which I think it's evident with some of the parts throughout this album. Some of the emotional outbursts that we see throughout some of the lyricism out of this album feels more concerning rather than tongue-in-cheek fun stuff. And I know that with me making this review, I'm giving more attention to this album and also more attention to Machine Gun Kelly as a person, who at this point publicly ridicules himself in many occasions. And some of the statements he has done are really cringy at best, and at its worst we're talking about borderline morally reprehensible stuff. But I'm obviously not gonna judge you for still wanting to support Machine Gun Kelly after everything he said. That's not my job. And I'm obviously not trying to let any sort of bias affect my thoughts on this album, but the constant attitude that we see throughout the lyricism of Machine Gun Kelly and the lack of effort throughout the entirety of this project really doesn't help on making the situation look any better or taking the album more seriously. And it's not like there was not a potential for something more over here. I mean, Tickets to My Downfall, it is a bad album, but I wouldn't consider it to be an abomination. Hell, I even enjoyed a Machine Gun Kelly track the previous year a lot, Dayworker with Corpse. I thought that this track was really good. I even put it as one of my favorite songs of the year. It was that good in my opinion. The horrorcore elements, the approaches with this song, it was something that I really enjoyed. But this album in its entirety feels like just a really cheap attempt on trying to revive pop punk for some reason, which leads to having moments over here like Emo Girl, which has to be one of the worst songs that I've heard this year so far. There is something really off-putting and extremely awkward with this really simplistic and basic generalization of emo girls. It's just done in a way that it doesn't feel of good taste whatsoever. I mean, it kinda fits that the very basic way of viewing emo girls is the same as how basic this track is overall. Instrumentally, this is like one of the most generic things you can ever think of. in terms of pop punk, and I don't believe that the rest of the album really provides something all that much compelling. For the most part, we get some pretty cringy lyrics, some kinda weak deliveries from Machine Gun Kelly, some really basic and standard and forgettable instrumentals, with the mixing at times really feeling kinda off. One of the great instances I can think of is with the track Make Up Sex, which outside of its really weak deliveries, I thought that some of the cuts in some of the sections and the mixing of the vocals would seem pretty off. Or there are other occasions where the album might sound extremely loud, with parts of the mixing having a general lack of balance, and at the loud moments it's also clipping at times. Funnily enough, I'd say that the track that I enjoyed the most over here was A, featuring Lil Wayne, which was a trap song. Yes, it is a really basic trap song, but honestly I preferred it compared to basically anything else when it comes to the pop punk tracks. I mean, there are other moments towards the end where we get trap instrumentals, like with the track Die in California, which in my opinion it's a pretty busy track with the features and it doesn't really sound good. I don't like the guitar work on this one, and it's just a really bland and mellow track, which is something that we get towards the end of the album. Like, the album kinda starts dynamic, but when we get towards the end, it gets pretty mellow and it has some of its worst moments with tracks like Seated Nancy and Twin Flame, which even if they're sort of trying to go into something more serious when it comes to the context and the lyricism, it's really hard to take seriously after moments like Drug Dealer or Mainstream Sellout. I don't really believe that there is that much of a reason to talk extensively about the track listing. I don't think there's more that's needed to be said, and at this point I'm giving this album much more attention than it deserves. But at the end of the day, this is my channel, I talk about whatever I want, and I just wanted to point out that this is a terrible album, and I don't think that it just has to do with the music or the lack of creativity, but the overall stance, the attitude, and the approach of Machine Gun Kelly really makes it that much harder to sit through and much more of an unlistenable experience. I'm gonna give Mainstream Sellout a 1 out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. If you like, if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.